We are all fed up with Kyrie Irving and Ben Simmons, but some media people are saying things that are ridiculous.
Kyrie Irving is box office. This brother deserves $50 million a year. I would never give him a long-term contract again. He cannot be trusted. You pay him 1 year at a time.
That is just not how the NBA works. Look, these off-season videos are not for hot takes. They're for real talk and explaining how things actually operate. I will explain why the Nets would actually be a disaster if they let Kyrie leave. But there are a lot of other issues. Obviously, their defense needs an upgrade. And are we sure that Steve Nash is the right head coach? I know Steve Kerr didn't have experience either, but Nash is not even respected. KD and Kyrie wanted their boy to be their coach. It's a disaster. First, the offseason basics. They have no cap space. They have just the $6.4 million mid-level exception. They need to get healthy, to get better defense, and they need a rim protecting big. Draft, they could either have the 23rd overall pick or no pick, depending on some protections. Relevant free agents, there are a ton. But Kyrie, Bruce Brown, Blake Griffin, Nick Claxton, and Goran Dragic. How bad were they? Well, they were projected to have 55.5 wins. They only won 44. First, let's get to Kyrie Irving. And before we get to this contract, I think people forget how much trouble Kyrie has actually been for them. Remember back in January 2020, when he publicly called out his teammates like they weren't good enough? At the time, by the way, they had Jarrett Allen, Spencer Dinwiddie, and Karis LeVert, all who are better options than what they have now. A year later, remember, he ditched the team without even telling Steve Nash why, and then he was filmed partying and having fun at his sister's birthday party. And of course, he didn't get vaccinated this year, which led not only for them not to have one of their best players, but it led to James Harden getting so frustrated he demanded a trade. Kyrie has played just 46% of the available games for the Nets, either because of injury or his wonderful personality. So why would they give him a max 5-year, $245 million contract? Bill Simmons put up this poll, and most people agree with Stephen A. Smith. Do not sign Kyrie long term. But here is the reality. Kyrie has all the leverage here. If they don't give him exactly what he wants, he could just leave in free agency, and the Nets are over the salary cap, even without Kyrie. So if he leaves, they can't just re-sign another star to replace him. They would have no one. They can't even sign and trade Kyrie because no one else is going to give them equal talent back. So as long as they have Kevin Durant, they have to field a competitive roster, right? Well, if Kyrie leaves, they cannot replace him. So Brooklyn is stuck. And I do not feel bad. They knew who he was before they signed him in the first place. They chose to do it anyway. So let's go through the actual realistic options. Number one, that 5-year, $245 million max. It's the most that Kyrie can get, and it's not a worse deal than, like, I don't know, Russell Westbrook. Look, Kyrie still is in his prime, and he does help them win games when he's out there. He doesn't have a no trade clause or anything, so technically he could build up his value, and then they could trade him later, as if that would ever happen. Option 2, 4 years, $190 million with the Nets. This is the most that he could make for 4 seasons. And the reason Kyrie might actually agree to this is to align with Kevin Durant's contract. Kyrie came in with KD and they could go out together. At least, if the Nets convince them to do this, it saves them $50 million in that final year. What about unrealistic option number 1? He opts in to that 1 year. Technically, he could opt into his $37 million player option for 1 season and then see where the team is next year. I honestly have no idea why he would do this and leave all that money on the table. Unrealistic option number 2, Kyrie just leaves in free agency. I don't know. He's not going to do this. The most he could technically make with another team is 4 years, $182 million, but no team is going to pay Kyrie that at this point, so it's not realistic. Look, I also love to hear Stephen A. Smith like shout at Kyrie Irving or Colin Cowherd saying, if I'm KD, I say get rid of Kyrie. Like, I love to hear that. It feels good, right? But it's not realistic. People are gonna freak out when Woj tweets that the Nets have signed Kyrie Irving to a long-term contract, but they have no choice. Next, let's talk about Ben Simmons. He is actually eligible for a contract extension. Obviously, he's not gonna get that. But look, we still don't know how he hurt his back without even playing a game. Oh wait, Shams actually has some new reporting on this. Simmons told the Nets a mental block still exists for him, which is creating stress that could serve as a trigger point for his back issues. What? So mental stress can now cause a herniated disc? Is that like when you sneeze and then you throw out your back? Look, I'm not saying that this isn't real, but I guess this means that as long as he has mental stress, the back issue could pop up at any time. This is like even worse than we thought. The Nets are also, by the way, stuck with Ben Simmons, so please do not come up with trade ideas. I only bring this up because there's only one way for Kevin Durant to fix all his teammates. That's for him to demand a trade. And I'm not saying this is gonna happen, but as you can see, the Nets are stuck with Kyrie and Ben. No one will trade for them. The only guy with trade value is KD. If he wants to get away from this toxic culture, he's gonna have to remove himself. Durant's got 4 more years on his contract, but in this era of player empowerment, dude, anything could happen. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it's probably not gonna happen, but I just want to make this clear. Okay, KD is the only one who can actually be traded. Now, what about getting players in trades or free agency? Outside of Ben Simmons and Joe Harris getting healthy, this is the only way the Nets can improve. Here's a list of all of their free agents in-house. And there are some really important names on this list, but the only guys I think they have to bring back are Bruce Brown and Nick Claxton. Look, I know Blake Griffin played well, but he's out of the rotation for a reason. Andre Drummond was horrible defensively, benched in the playoffs. I think Goran Dragic is just a luxury at point guard, but they can use bird rights to re-sign Brown and Claxton. Then they could use the mid-level exception to get a wing, like Robert Covington, Nicholas Batum, Kyle Anderson, or Gary Payton II. If the Clippers use their mid-level on Isaiah Hartenstein, their wings could be stolen by Brooklyn. Kyle Anderson is a big option who provides defense, and we all know Gary Payton and the player he's turned himself into. He could leave if Brooklyn offers him a bigger role. Now let's talk about trades. And actually, the Nets could make a pretty exciting deal. They have 5 trade exceptions, including one for about $11 million and one for about $6 million. If the owner, Joe Tsai, wants to spend big, they could trade the Sixers 2 picks and their own 2029 pick to get a decent player. Trade targets to look at include Rashawn Holmes, Jakob Poeltl, Royce O'Neal, Nerlens Noel. I know none of those names are sexy, but they would all come in handy in the playoffs. The future of Steve Nash. Look, I know he was in a horrible situation, but in games 1 and 2 against the Celtics, the Nets could have won, but Nash did not make in-game adjustments. He is inexperienced and soft on players. Look, the best boss you can have that will get the most out of you is not your buddy, even though that would be more fun. It's somebody that you don't want to let down because you respect them, like as an authority figure. The one major change that Brooklyn can make is at head coach. I would fire Steve Nash and look at a different voice. The #1 candidate is Quinn Snyder. Every team's gonna want him, including the Lakers, because he is brilliant with X's and O's and he's a hard-nosed guy. What about Alvin Gentry? And look, I know he's older, but he is a really smart coach who doesn't give a F. Gentry is fine, actually, never working again, so he's not afraid to get fired from telling players to grow up. But the #1 thing I've taken away from this Nets season is I don't feel bad for Kevin Durant at all. In fact, I put everything that's happened to him since he left the Warriors on him, not Kyrie. I don't blame Kyrie. I don't blame Ben Simmons. I blame Kevin Durant, and I made a whole video about it. Check it out.